Welcome to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Listen in as Mindy, Keith, and their guests take a deep dive into their own minds and souls to investigate the beauty of imperfection, challenge their beliefs, and embrace the richness of living a truly authentic life. Welcome to Chasing Thoughts.
Hi, guys.
Hey, how you doing?
How are you?
Good. So we have a guest on the show today. Keith, why don't you introduce our guest?
This is my wife, Sandi. We've been married 28 years this year. We had 2 year split and then 1 year divorce. But she has been with me from the beginning. We got married the day before I left for my unit in Italy. So yeah, I joined the military, came home, got married, flew to Italy, and then she showed up like 4 months later, 3 months later, and then I think a month after that, I was in Bosnia. So she was alone in a foreign country, and we lived like they call it on the economy. So we were surrounded by Italians. There were no Americans in the area. It wasn't like base housing or anything like that. So I just dropped her in the middle of Italy and left. Yeah. So
Well, I cannot wait to hear from you today, Sandi, because, Keith shared his story with us. And I find one of the most enjoyable parts of my life is my marriage and having a partner to go through things with. And it's a fascinating and rich human experience, right? Because one of the questions I'm going to ask you, as we go through life, trauma changes us and things change us, right? And you're evolving, and then you're trying to do that with another person and leave space and compassion. And it's just such an interesting experience. And so I love talking about marriage and partnership and stuff. And so I'd love to hear from you to start. What was Keith like when you met him? Why did you fall in love with him? And then when he got out and he was a different person, what was that like?
So initially when I met Keith, it was almost, you have to remember, we were 18 going on 19. Well, Keith was 19. I was 18 going on 19 when we met. And it was a short period of time that we dated. We dated for about 4 months. Keith left for the military and we were engaged before he left. But you have to remember, basic training back in the 90s, there was no cell phone, there was no email there. So whenever I got to talk to him, it was normally because he was doing things that he shouldn't have been and sneaking to the payphone to make a collect call. So in that time, we got to talk to each other, but it was mostly handwritten letters. And then I, went down for family day and then we got married. So it was 10 months that we were together and got married. And in between that was basic training. So when you put the math together, we really had about 4 months together and then decided to get married. But he was very playful. There was a lot of energy as far as he liked to do things. We would go places, we would investigate things, we would do trips. So it was a lot of kind of discovering each other as we grew into this relationship, but always making me laugh. Always, I feel like he lived to make me smile. And then Bosnia happened and there were little changes. They were subtle changes. When you anticipate, they bring the wives together and say, you have to expect there'll be changes. You have to expect that your husbands will come back and they'll want to run the house. And you've been doing that while they've been away and the responsibilities fall to you. And I was pregnant when Keith had left and come back from Bosnia. So, we had a lot going on in that time. So at that point, I think I'd look back and say, oh, it was expecting a child that had kind of changed things. And then we had a second daughter 14 months later. So, I mean, things just kind of...
It's survival mode in a way, right? You're just doing what you need to do to get through each day.
Yep. And with two little ones, and then Keith would leave for training. But training when you're in Europe isn't the same as it is here in the States. It was a 6-week stint that the guys would leave. So you're left home to manage a home and 2 small children under 2 for 6 weeks by yourself. So, but I enjoyed it. But then when we got home from Italy and Keith took on a regular job and we were back surrounded by family, you would think that things would just tend to get better. And they didn't. They tended to regress, where there seemed to be a lot of like frustration, anger, and underlying just unhappiness. And I couldn't figure out what I was doing to make Keith unhappy. And that was tough because it wasn't the person that I met, fell in love with, and got married. Now I know a lot of people say, but you only knew him for 4 months. No, a lot changed. You know, looking back on it, there was quite a shift.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
about the first day I got home at night when the light turned on.
So, you know, as young kids, and I'm going to say this and I'm probably going to regret it, but as young kids, you know, you're afraid of the dark. And at 19, you're in a foreign country. And when we would shut the shades over there, they were blackout. Like I could not see my hand in front of my face. So I smack the light off and run and jump in the bed. And that was hysterical, you know, because you don't want anything from under the bed grabbing you. Right? I mean, that's everybody's fear. Well, then we had moved into one of the smaller rooms in our apartment so that our daughters could have the large room. And we had a faulty wiring in the wall in the living room, and the light had gone on. And Keith had been back a very short amount of time. And when I woke him up and said, oh, the light's on, what's going on? He kept a knife by the bed. And when I tell you that he put the knife in his mouth and crawled out of bed and crawled out into the living room, that was my first, like, this isn't normal.
Right.
But
There's
how
something
to confront it when that's his reaction is just to let him do his thing. And I don't really think that we talked about it because I think it had alarmed him as much as it had alarmed me. And you don't talk about stuff like it's weird what you don't talk about in the moment when there's such a bizarre change.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. First one is going back just to when you were in military, like, were you in military housing with other military wives around you? No, you were just in public.
Yep.
Well, Italian public.
Yep.
Right.
So we lived, our landlady knew one word in English, and that was rent. And other than that, the people that surrounded us were all Italians, and a lot of them were older. So there was no like, so you meet younger Italians, and if as you're learning their language and try to speak it, they'll speak English to you. But it wasn't like that with the older Italians. So we'd be walking and elderly people would come up and touch the baby and say stuff. And I'd be like, I don't know what you're saying, but you're smiling. So I guess it's okay. But yeah, no, we were surrounded by just purely Italians.
So that must have been pretty like isolating for you. Did you have like English speaking other military wives, or who did you have there when Keith was gone? Anybody?
So we had a couple of friends that were gracious enough to like pick me up and we'd go and hang out on base for a while. But for the time that Keith was in Bosnia, which was almost 90 days, I think I spent maybe a week's worth of time on base. Other than that, it was in the apartment by myself waiting. You're kind of on pins and needles waiting.
Do you think that formed a unique bond with, did you have daughter or daughters, your kids at that time?
I'd like to think that having that time solely for me and my daughters when Keith was away definitely led for a bonding experience. They were much younger, they were infant and toddler, but we didn't have TV. We made it a conscious effort to just be present for the girls when they were that tiny. And I think that it gave me an appreciation and a love for motherhood. And I soaked up all the time that I could in the moment, especially with knowing that Keith at any moment could be called away. So it was important that I really focus on my family.
Yeah. I was just curious about that because I had my son really young and it was just us, and I was a single parent, and there was a lot of healing and trauma. And so we sort of have this like buddy bond where we're like, we went through this together. And when I got remarried, actually, no, I was 6. And my step-husband had a really hard time because he's like, I can't touch what you guys have. Like, how do I get in that? Right. And it was hard for us because we didn't even know necessarily what he was talking about. We were just so connected through this set of circumstances that we'd been through. And so that was actually like years of working through it as a step family to try to integrate a new person to that like secure bond. So I was just curious if you had any like similarities, right?
So when Keith and I were separated and divorced, so we were apart for a total of 3 years. Anytime, because we shared custody, and I say shared custody, but we lived in the same city. So it still was, we were daily engrossed in one another's lives for the kids' sake. But anytime that the girls were with me, it was our time. It was, let's do manicures, pedicures, let's have a slumber party, let's sleep in mom's bed, no, it was definitely the three of us. And I think to this day that the girls and I think what we have is unique compared to a lot of the other women that I know that have daughters, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, nothing's good or bad or right or wrong. It's just interesting to me when I meet people and I'm like, oh, I see how this similar experience forms this, right? 2 + 2 is 4. And that's a common experience, I think, for a lot of people who have this either single mom or trauma or military. So it's interesting to me. The other thing that I wanted to touch on that you said is that when Keith got back, you were like, what am I doing? How come I'm not making him happy? What can I do to make him happy? And I just wanted to give voice to what I think is, it happens for males too, but I think primarily like hardcore female conditioning that we make our partners happy and that we're responsible for that. And I still like, if my husband was unhappy this morning and immediately my brain is like, oh, what's wrong with you? How can you make it better? And I have to like take a minute and like try to change my brain in the moment, not to go to that place, because it's such a weird place that like culture and society has set up for us and as women, and it sucks. And so I just want to like give voice to that and then hear about, I'm assuming at some point you said, oh, Keith's happiness is not my responsibility, or your happiness became more important, right?
Yes, I ironically trying to figure it out when we were together. And I'm grateful that Keith and I are remarried because it's the same but different.
Yeah.
But having that time apart, there becomes this blame game when you go through a situation like that of, a lot of finger pointing. And even if I weren't initially at fault, trust me when I tell you that unfortunately I allowed for spite to dig deep and
Yeah.
to react and behave in that manner, which I'm ashamed of. But we also belong to a church that was very like, women need to submit, your husband. And I was raised by a single mom, so that whole thing of trying to like learn that was so foreign. And I struggled inside to try, but Keith even then was like, no, that's not what I want. I want someone that will partner with me. We do things together. So for that, I'm grateful, but it's that voice that says, what could you do differently? Where are you failing? How could you? And then when we separated, it was this like clear picture that was, no, if I take care of me and I'm who I need to be, and Keith is responsible for him, then we should be able to be adults and navigate together. And I think essentially that's really what came to pass.
Yeah. So what was sort of the final straw that had you separate? Like lead us, tell us that story. I mean, we don't have to tell like a specific story, but help me understand as you're weaving this whole tale. You come back, it's shaky, this crazy thing happens with the knife, you're kind of scared, it's like walking on eggshells. How long does that go on for? And what's your experience of it until you move out?
Can I say one thing real fast? So she was talking, but she was like, I'm nervous that I'm going to say something that's going to, hurt my feelings. But you know, talking about like the church we grew up in, there's a verse that always never made sense to me. It said that we can be vessel, or there's vessels unto honor and unto dishonor. But it doesn't go on to say that it's bad to be a vessel unto dishonor. You know, I mean, we dig up broken vessels from the past and they're priceless. So you can learn just as much from the dishonorable parts of our life as we can from the honorable parts. So I want her to say exactly without worrying about me. I mean, she'll pay for it later, but once this is over.
Yeah, I think that's great, Keith. And I want to mention as part of that, because I think it's really important, is when you have a partnership like that, where you can bring up old wounds and old stuff, it's okay for the other person to be too, like, whoa, I feel myself shutting down right now. Like, wow, I'm getting defensive. You've triggered so much shame. I need to walk away, right? Like that's okay. And that's part of that. And then you work through the memory or the past, and you work through the emotion it's triggering at the same time. And that's the beauty of relationship, right? That piece of it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So yeah, go ahead and tell a story, and Keith will punish you for it later.
So we came back in 99, and we lived with Keith's parents, because coming back with 2 kids, Keith was working a $10 an hour job. There was no way that we could support a family of 4, even back in 99. So Keith was driving 50 miles one way for a job that he had gotten. So $10 an hour, you know, we do the math. That's not a lot. So we lived with his parents, which wasn't bad. It was a nice segue into what we would then find an apartment and get settled. But I ended up becoming friends with a girl, not knowing that her intention was to remove me from the picture to have my husband, but pretended to be my best friend. So I'm going along thinking that I have this best friend. And what I don't know is that she's plotting, you know, but Keith was vulnerable at that time, you know, not understanding the PTSD that he was living with and dealing with. So of course, you know, here comes this other person.
And scientifically, what doctors describe that as, my vulnerability was I was an asshole. To make that clear.
That was the official diagnosis.
Yeah. Yes.
So, you know, that was 99. I think she kind of came into our lives around 2000, and by 2004, there were some mind games that were played, and I think it was a way that Keith dealt with the guilt, and, you know, kind of assuaged his guilt, was to go ahead and make me feel like I was crazy. And he obviously had help from my best friend, you know, to make me feel like I was losing my mind. And I just had enough. And I realized, you know, if my mom could do this with 2 kids in the 70s, then I'm doing it. And, you know, Keith would come home. He worked as a correctional officer, and a lot of weight. I understand that looking back now. You know, you're inside a place with all darkness. You're with a whole bunch of corrupt people on both sides of the bars. You know, so it's heavy. So he'd come home, and I was his sounding board, but I didn't always appreciate being the sounding board. And
Well, I was screaming at her, you know, like I would, even with a good day, I would start off talking, and by the end of the conversation, I'm screaming, you know.
Yeah.
So she's making me, like, in my head, I'm like, wow, I don't sound that bad, you know, but the rage was completely out of control. It was abusive. It was emotionally abusive. I'll never forget the day that she had caught me talking to this girl, and within 5 minutes I had her convinced that she was wrong, all through screaming and manipulating and twisting everything. And then she just stopped, looked up at me, and started crying, and said, I think I need to go to the hospital. And that's how bad I had her twisted. So I mean, that was an evil part of my life, you know. Like Sandi says, it's vulnerability and stuff, which I get the reasons behind it, but I still take responsibility for the actions.
Yeah. In that moment when you were behaving that way, Keith, did it seem like it was in your control or a choice?
No, I remember, so there was one time, some sheet music was left out on a counter. It was a Little Mermaid song. And so I asked the girls, is it theirs? And they said no. And I asked Sandi if it was hers. I think you were at work, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna just come home.
Oh yeah. And she said no. And I see now that PTSD like demands this level of certainty, control. Like, so anything that's outside of control, warning bells go off, questions, it all starts. So I started screaming. I mean, I'm red in the face, and I was not as rotund back then. I was more in shape. So you could see in the girls' faces, they were I don't
Scared.
know, 10, they were white. Sandy's trying to like appease me and stuff. And in a small corner in the back of my head, there was a voice screaming, shut up, shut up, shut up. This is not right. This is wrong. But it was trapped. That voice
Yes.
was trapped back there, and I was out of control. It felt almost like an out of body experience.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's important to talk about because it's hard to have compassion for someone and boundaries at the same time, right? That's one of the most difficult things that we have to do in life. But my experience is that most people who are suffering or behaving badly, like it's innocent in some respect, right? Not a lot of people are actively choosing to hurt other people. That's a small percentage.
Right.
And so, loving someone is helping them heal, which might mean leaving them and making this firm boundary. And that is so hard when you love someone.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was difficult, but it had gotten to the point, and Keith is right. A lot of it, like I look back and if I really don't focus on it, it just feels like it was a blip. I really don't even remember it. I don't remember the separation. I don't remember really the divorce. Um, but if I look back, there was a point of time where I didn't like Keith. I could no longer stand him. I couldn't tolerate
Oh, I
looking
bet.
at him. Yeah, and so for me it was that moment, and he'd come home, and it was probably about 12:30 in the morning, and he had just gotten out of the shower and was like yelling, and I said, "Nah, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
done. I want a divorce.
Yep.
This is it." And if I had slapped him across the face, I probably would not have gotten the same reaction. It was almost like his reality just came bearing down all at once, and out of all the things that we'd ever gone through, the minute I said I'm done, I want a divorce, he was quiet. And I thought, whoa, there's no yelling, there's no screaming, there's no temper tantrum. It was just, I think the enormity of that sentence just stopped him dead.
Yeah. And I think you shared before, Keith, that that was the real turning point for you when you decided to take up your healing journey. It's almost, yeah, it's like that voice that you said was trapped back there. Something about that activated that so that it could have more power, right? Maybe it was love, right? Love activated that vulnerable, tiny little boy that was scared and acting out.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
because from the beginning, I was convinced, and I understand it now, the pain and pleasure principle, it would have been too painful for me to say, this is my fault, and this is an internal thing, you know? So I would blame her for everything, especially, I mean, Christianity gave me an avenue to take because
yeah,
like, and it was a common thing. We've known multiple people, Christians, that men who cheated and then blame the wife, saying that she wasn't the right type of woman. And since women are still looked at as lower level, you shut up, you be submissive to the men, all that stuff, it played in. I mean, she spent hours, like when I was at work, on her knees on my bedside, praying, begging God. For years, she did that. And it was just, nope, I'm blaming you. And I had this when I went back to the church, because we were finally kicked out of that church. She was too, for some reason. We still don't understand why. But I went back. People were congratulating me, being like, all right, brother, keep your head up. And it was like, I'm at fault. Like, what are you talking about? you should like be kicking my ass and saying, look at what you're doing to this girl, you know, but instead they were congratulating me and demonizing her. And it's what opened me up to, because, you know, something was there. I knew that what just happened was not good. But because I had blamed her for so long, I was like, now I'm gonna be able to go live my life. Everything is gonna be great. And things lasted with that other girl like for a little bit, and it became very, very clear that the grass isn't always greener, you
Yeah.
know, because then the same behaviors were going towards her. And even and she had her part and everything, but again, it was all the stuff that was going on me, and that ripple effect goes out where I ended up causing problems in a whole nother family,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
which I feel bad about, you know. So but yeah, that's when things started opening up, because I remember when I came to you and talked about how it was, I'm gonna focus on me and that's it. I'm not gonna blame or anything. And then it was the weirdest thing, because she was like, last night I had the same thought. I'm no longer blaming you for my problem. And I'm like, but I am the cause of your problems, you know? But we came to that same conclusion at the same point. We're not gonna blame each other. We're just gonna be responsible for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I know, Keith and I, we're always surprised by how much we have in common. And in this, I actually share an experience with both of you. So, my first husband was or became a meth addict, and he would just disappear for weeks, right? Crazy, violent, yelling. So, very similar there. And my response to that as a good Christian woman was to wake up an hour earlier every single morning so that I could pray for an hour before I went to work my 8-hour shift, and then take care of our son while he was out doing a bunch of drugs, right? No boundaries, no talking about like what was a healthy decision. So I totally relate to that, and how hard and also how empowering it is to leave that behind and make healthy choices for years. And then also at the same time, Keith, I had an affair with a married man because I felt so dead and so ignored that I still, to this day, even though I would never do that again, am grateful that I did it, because it gave me enough life that I could leave my husband. That affair did. It put enough of me back in me, or enough like attention or love that I could leave my marriage. And so these things are complicated and nuanced, right? And I think when we're growing up, it seems so cut and dry. Oh, he's a cheater, or she's not good enough, or this. But when you start to dig into who people are and why they behave the way they behave, it's nuanced and difficult. And you're right, it's rich. Yeah. So then how long were you guys apart, and what brought you back together?
So, I kicked Keith out on June 4th, told him I wanted a divorce, and that was 2004. And we were remarried October 13th, 2007. And in that time, we got divorced August 8th of 2006. I lost my mom September 9th of 2006. And for me, that was kind of a catalyst of I don't I don't want to live this way anymore. Like whatever's going to be is going to be. And that's about the time that we both came to the realization that we need to own who we are, and
Yeah.
either we're going to make it work and be better, or just continue on the path that I was on. And I know that through my mom's death, I'd like to think that that's probably what was the catalyst for me, is I started to rely more on Keith, who proved that he could
Mm,
be reliable and was there. And I think it rebuilt our friendship. And I can remember it was Mother's Day 2007. And I can remember thinking, how is it possible that I could actually love this man? Like, this makes
yeah.
sense. Like I was so confused. And Keith's PTSD diagnosis, the reality is it's not just the soldier, or it's not just the person with the PTSD that deals with this diagnosis. There's secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. And I feel like I could have really connected with that diagnosis of, careful of what I say, careful of how I approach things, careful of what I ask for, careful how I ask for it, careful on how the girls behaved around Keith. And I think around the time 2007 came around, that started to change. Yeah, it really was a different dynamic. And, the girls were getting older. And yeah, I looked at him. We were at his mom's house, and I don't remember why we were there, but I just thought, how could I love this man? I didn't like him a year ago. I hated him 2 years ago. It was bizarre.
Yeah. Had you intentionally done any healing, or did it sort of happen naturally?
I think it all started to happen naturally once I had lost my brother and my father in a short amount of time after Keith and I separated, and then my mother had passed away right after the divorce. And I think it was that realization for me, like my circle's getting smaller, and you think you have all of this long life to live, and then when the people that are most important to you start to pass on, it left me with a different reality of what am I doing?
Huh.
I get it. Life can be really great and fun, but it also has, the sharp and the difficult side. And what what am I doing? What is my intention for the days that I have left?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you guys got remarried, are you in your late 20s now? Is that right?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
29 when we got remarried.
Which is still pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two kids. It's just funny. I think our generation, that's more normal, but for today's generation, that's really young, right? When I tell people I had my son when I was 22, they're like, what? Right? That used
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
normal. It's not anymore. It's interesting. And you guys have daughters. My son's 21, and I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, I can't imagine him having a kid,
Right.
you
When my
know?
daughter turned 21, I thought, well, when she was 19, I thought, how did my parents ever agree to let me get married? Like, what was wrong with them? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And by the time I was 22, we were done having kids. And I just look back and I'm like, no, no, what? It's ridiculous now to think about. But I'm grateful that I got to grow up and mature as my kids aged. I feel like that was a benefit for me personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it was for me as well. And it's given my son and I this very open relationship where he sees me growing. We talk about my growth and we talk about his growth. It's not that traditional, like I know the answer's parent and I'm the child, right? It's more integrated. And I think that's healthier.
Just because we have what we have today doesn't mean that it was always easy, especially being a single mom, especially having to work a full-time and a part-time job just to maintain an apartment. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of, coming back to the table and saying, "Hey, look, just because I was a parent, just because I'm your mom doesn't mean I always had it right, and I'm sorry for where I fell short." And, you know, still to this day, I could apologize to my daughters and say, I wish I had, and it doesn't, you can fill in the blank with whatever you want, but we're fortunate enough that we have daughters that are like, hey, look, we get it. And the fact that you own it, it
Yeah.
means the world to us. And I think that's what has given us such a close relationship with our daughters.
Yeah. So tell a little bit about you're remarried now. What is it like to be married to Keith? And I'm assuming he's getting better and better and better as he finds his therapist, and right, because we've heard your side of the story, Keith, in the last couple issues. So like, what's that like? Like you said, I thought what you said about secondary PTSD, I'm so glad you said that, because people need to hear that that's a real thing. And yeah, so you're healing your own self from your PTSD. He's healing himself. What did that look like?
So I did fall back in love with Keith, and he was the same yet different, because you have to take the pieces that have now been rearranged, and as he's trying to put them back the best he knows how, into what he feels fits. And I'm doing the same. The first year remarried was good. It was really good. And then the realization of the PTSD and old habits start to creep back in. And what, 5 years ago is when you started this journey of gonna fix the PTSD.
Yeah.
So 6 years ago, probably a year before Keith started on this, really the healing portion. If things hadn't changed, Mindy, I probably would have walked away. It
Yeah.
was that point again where you can only cope the best that you know how in the way that you feel that you're supposed to without really hashing out the small issues when old habits come back. And
Yeah.
if Keith hadn't found it, and we had gotten into an argument probably 2 years into his healing journey, and he was speaking calmly, and a lot of people would be like, oh, that's wonderful. And I found it duplicitous. I was trying to figure out, like, what's your angle? Now you're going to make me crazy because you're calm. And it made me lose my temper because now you're playing me. Now you are trying to, no, now you're making me feel like I'm crazy and you're using this against me.
The best thing though was when this happened, I had just finished a portion of my classes, my life coaching classes, because it was a 100-hour course, but it took me 5 years to do. Because I'm like, I'm going to integrate this stuff, and until I do, I'm going to keep going through. And they talked about when you start to change, the other person isn't going to go, oh, this is lovely. They're going to freak out because they're not going to trust, because we communicate non-verbally as well. And they're used to that communication. And that's more of like on the subconscious level. So, oh yeah, she went off the deep end for a little bit.
Yeah. And humans don't like change. Even if we
Yeah.
want change and it's positive change, we struggle with it. It's hard. So when someone in your life is changing, that feels like the rug being pulled out from under you, right? You're like, whoa, wait a second. And it's hard on the people around us. And we have to give them grace and space to, bump around a little bit and come to their new normal, which is hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like he looked at me and just said, I'm going to go out in the garage. And, I don't remember exactly what I did, but knowing me, I probably banged some things around and stomped around and was cussing under my breath and just having a heart attack. Like he thinks I'm an idiot and, yeah, go out in the garage. Yeah, I was probably accurate. Like, yeah, right. You're not. But through that, when I realized that he didn't come back in to continue the argument, that's a game changer. Our backstory is I'm not good at walking away. I grew up in a single home, but when my father was around, he was abusive, and my mom would not shut her mouth. And I can remember saying, if you just shut your mouth, he won't beat you. But in my DNA is the ability to not shut my mouth. So if Keith wants to bring it, I'm on the ready. Let's go. So keeping my mouth shut. But when he didn't come back in and argue, I thought, okay, I have to reevaluate what's going on because there are changes. Whether or not I want to acknowledge them, there are changes. So I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think from that point was kind of changing. I struggled with some things and I'd ask him and then he'd go into coach mode and I'd be like, yeah, no, I don't, yep, stop. I don't need to be coached. But then the more I watched and the more I picked up, I thought, okay, if he can do this, I can do this.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that we've had a lot of really great conversations. I think that, life isn't all rosy and easy,
Nope.
but I feel like we've come to this common ground where we know that we can handle it. We'll get through it and it's not going to be easy, but it's no longer this like, oh my gosh, what is he going to say? What's he going to think? That's not even on the table anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so, because I almost feel like you're still shocked sometimes.
Yeah, well, I'll have a feeling, something that I would have said maybe 6 years ago, or Keith would say, I know that this bothers you. And of course, I'm like, no, no, it doesn't bother me. And inside I'm like, oh, I just want to wring someone's neck. And now I'm like, okay, I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm if I tell you this, I don't want to upset you, and I'll say it. And his reaction is, no, I'm glad that you've explained it that way. And he may not want to hear it, but it's definitely not this like defensive, let's pull out the boxing gloves anymore. It's, no, I can understand, and I didn't mean that, or I'm sorry you didn't feel like I heard you. Definitely a whole different dynamic. But I feel had Bosnia not happened, this would have been more the key that we got to grow with
Yeah.
initially. So I think
Yeah.
I don't know. Because that prior to that, I was so invested in that church. And
Mhm.
it what you learn is in my mind, um, how to abuse women, you know, and I'm not talking about like, you know, slapping and stuff, but we were in a Sunday school class once and it was like on marriage, and the pastor was the head of it. So he asked, how do you know when your wife loves you? And this guy who was, you know, he was one of the like ushers, like he wanted, like church was his entire, I mean, he had this militant look on his face and he goes, obedience. And then his wife started going off in him in class, best Sunday school class I've ever been in, you know, because she's like, well, maybe if you were the type of guy I would want to obey, I would. And I'm like, oh, nice, you know. So, but there's that thing like where women are less than in God's eyes, so therefore they're. The Bible says they need to be like submissive to me. So sit down and shut up, you know. So I think that there might have been. I think I might have gone further into that world, and I don't think we would have the relationship that we have right now. You know,
Mm.
sh- it took me 2 years to convince her to let me try marijuana as a medicine. And now she's like, all right, you're stressing, you're a little bit cranky, whatever. Why don't you go out and smoke? Like when she says go, I went in the garage. You know, I don't go in my garage and like stand in a corner and wait for time out. That's where I go and smoke because like she can't stand the smell. Now she's like, you know, she's popping gummies for sleep sometimes and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll tell her, but like, yeah, I'm gonna do some mushrooms today. And in my head, I'm still judging myself. I'm like, oh, she's judging, and she's just like, oh, all right, yeah, have fun. You know, so it's so different. And she no longer prays, you know, like, you know, on my bedside, but she talks to the universe. And there's some cool things like I really think she's connected. I call her a witch.
The good kind, the good kind.
Yeah, because like she'll have dreams that come true. um like her friend's sister was going to be discharged from the hospital, and Sandy had a dream and she was like, I don't think your sister's getting out today. I think she has one more thing to get through. And sure enough, her blood oxygen level went crazy and they had to keep her for a little bit longer, you know. And she is not as sweet, like she's kind of like she's a sociopath. So she acts all sweet, everybody loves her, you know. But when we get divorced, we had agreed I would claim one kid on my taxes, she would claim the other. Soon as she got her W-2, she went and claimed both. So when I went to file my taxes to claim one, they're like, dude, both of them are already claimed. I owed like $10,000, which I couldn't pay. So every month I'm paying the bare minimum, which means I'm going deeper in debt every month. And she's just like laughing. So, but
You know, there's a price to pay for everything.
can I, so just the other day, I woke up to a text from her. She had left for work, and when she leaves for work, sometimes I like to take my first nap of the day. Um, and like out of the blue, and what I had learned was I need to meet her needs without any expectations of that being reciprocated. Because when you're looking for the reciprocation, it brings it down a notch. You know, maybe it's still love, but it's more of a bartering system. You
And it
know,
opens the door for resentment, right?
yes, because oh, she's not paying attention to me. And you know what?
Right.
Sometimes she comes home from work and she's had a rough day. Of course she's not. I don't want her to pay attention to me in those, you know. So I'm like, okay, this is what they're saying, and the coaching stuff has helped me out so much so far. So I'm gonna apply it. and I have no evidence it's going to work, besides what they tell me, And so I just started doing everything to meet her needs, little stuff. Like I do the dishes at night because she cooks, and I'll take then I'll dry them off, and then I just throw the dish towel on the counter. I'm good. We're good.
Right.
Tomorrow morning it'll be there for me to dry off other dishes. Oh my God. Like if she's ever gonna like end me, like it's gonna be because of the dish towels are left on the counter. So I start putting them where she wants them. Just little things like that I don't see as like, what is the big deal here?
Yeah.
Wiping off the counter like that, the water gets on. Even like last time I wiped it off and all she hears is this water hitting the floor. I'm like, oh crap, man. But I woke up out of the blue and she sent me a text and just said, I just really want you to know how much I love you. 28 years later, and I feel more in love with you today than ever. It's not lost on me how much effort you've put in, especially lately. I feel heard and taken care of. It's the little things. And that was always her biggest complaint, was that she did not feel heard at all by me.
Yeah. I love that story because I think it's so hard to accept another person like they are when they're not, in the ways that they're not like us. Because I'm similar. I'm sort of chaotic, messy, but my husband's very exacting. He wants all the forks faced the same way in the drawer, right? And I'm like, no, they can just be in a pile. But recognizing that actually like gives him a bad feeling inside and ups his stress level when he opens the drawer and doesn't see, like, I don't understand it, but I have to accept that what he's telling me is the truth and he needs me to do that. And getting to that level where you accept somebody for who they are instead of going, well, that's dumb, why do you let it bother you?
Yeah, yeah.
Is huge, right? And then we begin to help each other have less triggers throughout the day, and the bond becomes stronger and stronger, and we can go further and further in life. But yeah, those little things are so much, so much.
And the humor, to me, has been a lifesaver.
Yeah.
Um, I actually look forward to when Sandi starts getting mad now, because I'll joke with it, and like yesterday, it was like we sat down to watch or to have dinner, and like she just didn't feel right for some reason. She's like, I don't know what's going on, and it'd been a day at work and stuff, so she's like kind of like in a bad mood, and I'm just like, whoa, all right, and I'm just like making, and she starts threatening me and stuff, like, oh yeah, come say it to my family, I ain't coming anywhere near you, right? And it turns it into a funny
Right.
thing where we're now enjoying each other, even though she's in a like not feeling her best.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we can learn to enjoy each other when we're feeling great, when we're feeling pissed, when we're feeling like we just want to shut our eyes to the world and disappear.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever is happening is safe here, right? Like we have enough room in our relationship for you to be grumpy. We have enough room in our relationship for you to be having a bad day. Right. And what a freedom in that for both people,
Right.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have one last question for you. And I'm curious about this. I don't even know the answer. I think when we talk about abusive relationships, particularly emotionally and mentally abusive, because it's not clear cut, right? You don't have a bruise, you didn't get hit. I guess just what is your opinion about people staying and working through it, people leaving, people, because of course no one should ever put up with abuse ever, right? And also there's beautiful stories like yours. Like I'm just curious now, like if you knew a woman or a woman who's in the situation, what would you say about it?
Wow. That's a loaded question.
Like I have no idea either, and that's why I'm asking, because I was through an abusive relationship too, right? And I get it, and then I also don't get it at all. So I'm just, you don't have to have the answer, I'm just curious your thoughts.
Right. It would definitely, not that I would ever want to see somebody be physically abused, but it's definitely easier when you know that there's harm, imminent harm that could come, that could really potentially end someone's life, to say you need to walk away.
Yep.
But there were times where I'd say to Keith, I'd rather that you hit me, because that sting will go away. what you say or how you treat me is almost everlasting.
Yes.
So I would have rather have been smacked in some instances than to have been spoken to or ghosted in the
Yes.
manner in which I was. You know, to feel like you're crazy, you know, let's just get it over, break a rib. Let's just, you know, that will heal and go away and I'll forget it. You know, the bone will always show that it was broken, but we can move forward. That's easy. I think I think it has to be an honest conversation that you have with your partner, and you have to have an honest inner conversation first. Like, are you willing to give this person space and grace to grow if they are willing to acknowledge that there's work to be done in their personal life? You know, I get that we share a life, but if you can't do the work and you can't put forth the effort, then I cannot stay because it's not healthy.
Yes.
But if I say that I love you, and I know that we all love to say that, you know, we're in love, love has many different forms. It's not just this, you know, love is enduring, it is long suffering, it has to be, or I challenge, is your love real? If you're not long suffering to the person that you have said that you love, is it really love? But if the person is not willing to put in the work so that we benefit, then I have to move on. And if
Yeah.
that means that I'm single for the rest of my days, then I'm single because I can own what I need to do for me, who I am. But if that person is willing to put in the work, you have to be able to give grace and space and allow for there to be trip ups.
Mhm.
Keith has grown. Keith is more of who he was now when we first started dating than he was probably the last 5 years that we were married the first time. And it makes me happy to be able to tell the girls like who your dad is now is essentially who I initially fell in love with. And you know, our oldest, when Keith left for Bosnia, I was pregnant. He wrote her a letter and I saved it because nobody knew what was going to happen. But when she turned 18, I was able to give her the journal and the letter that Keith wrote. And I know when she initially read it, she was like, yeah, right. I don't know what this guy was talking about. This isn't my dad. But reading it a couple years later, she's able to see Keith for who he was when we initially got pregnant with her. And it's done me a world of good to see Keith through my daughter's eyes as they've acknowledged the changes that he's made. But yeah, if you can't stay and give your partner grace to grow, if that's what they say they want to do and they're willing to make the changes, then I think it's better for both to walk away. And I
Yeah.
don't say that lightly.
Yeah. It's a good answer. It's a beautiful answer. And I think what you said earlier, that person's doing the work and that you're actually witnessing results, right? Then
Absolutely.
you stay, you have the compassion, right? If it's not causing you to self-abandon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you guys have such a beautiful story. You need to be on like When Harry Met Sally, one of those couples. You're like, we met at this time and then we did this. It's a really great story. I'm so glad that you both have shared it. It's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going to smoke in my garage right after this. It's not like hearing it. I forgot that thing that Makari was talking about, the letters, and I remember when she told me about that. And it's easy to get back into, I wasted 20 years or
Oh,
20 years that I could have had with joy. But if I focus on that, if I let myself sit in that perception, I'm gonna feel like garbage and trash, you know. So but that's where my mind is now, just with thank you, this conversation. Blame you again, you know. So yeah, I think it's important too, if there is a couple working through this, to know that there are going to be times where you also need to kind of separate and sit with the feelings,
Yeah.
and since our brains are designed to go negative, you have to take control and remember the good stuff, you
Yep.
know? So like, for instance, was it yesterday? I think he came home from work, and I had gotten a call from my daughter's husband, and I'm trying to tell the story. She's like, "Is everything okay?" I'm like, "Yes, everything's okay." He was talking about, well, what was he saying? And I just stopped and looked at her and starts laughing. I'm like, "Well, I'm trying to tell you the damn story." And we just both started cracking up, and laughing and just enjoying. So, there are just as many of those memories. And so I think it's important as you're working through that to also spend time in those memories and remembering why you fell in love in the first place.
Yeah. Like we always talk about, right? Where energy flows, where focus goes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And if you're focusing on all the bad stuff, those are all the feelings that you're going to have, and everything's going to appear that way. Oh, I bet they meant this. Oh, I bet they're lying about, because that's going to be your filter about it, even if it's none of that's true.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to put a different filter on it, a healthier one.
There was one time, I always remember this. We did exactly that. I did it first, and then 30 seconds later, Sandi did it. Right. So we were having dinner, and on Mondays it's big ass salad night, so we just had this big ass salad and stuff. And Sandi, and I was like, I took like an extra roll or something, and Sandy's like, "Oh, you taking that?" And in my head, I am automatic, because I was already judging myself. Already
Right.
mad, like judge, like, "Oh, she thinks I'm a fat ass," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm taking it," and I like just snapped at her, and she's like, "Whoa, I was just asking, like, because she needed to get some too," and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I thought you were saying, like, I
That
don't
was a
need it,
badass.
fat." And then literally 30 seconds, and I forget what it was for, but I asked her a question, and she like just turned around. She was like, "I'll be getting there," and then she's like, "I just did the same thing," and it was so funny to do that. And when I think it's so important too, when you build that, when you're growing together, it's almost like if you look at like a pyramid, and I'm on one side, she's on the other side. And the more we grow personally, the closer we do get together.
Yes.
And the more we grow together, the more the arguments, or the more the things that used to be perceived as a personal attack become things that we can laugh about and we can joke about and have fun about, and have fun
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about too is how important it is in a marriage to know how we fight. How are we going to fight better? Right? How are we
Oh,
going
I
to fight
love that.
productively? Please don't, we're not going to say this word, or we're going to make jokes about this, or and having agreements so that when you get to that place, your fighting is getting more and more productive, because you're not going to not
Yes.
fight, right? Like you're going to fight. So how do you do it better?
Yeah. That is such a great, how to fight better. Dude, you can like make a whole course on that, like how to fight with your spouse better.
No, it's true, but
Yeah,
that is, yeah, so important.
yeah. And I've been trying to make some videos, like I call it like just bare bones conversation, like where you strip away all the judgment, all the meat, and it's just like down to the nitty gritty stuff. And that has helped us so much where, um, and again, they become so small, I forget what it was about, but there was something that you had done, and I was upset, and then, but instead of reacting, there was no snapping. I just said, "Okay, this is the way I'm feeling, is what's going on. I'm feeling like when you do this, you don't care." And what her actual intention was, you're a little bit worked up, you're a little bit frustrated, so I'm going to give you some space so that you can relax. So boom, right there at that point, I know she's thinking about me, and so I'm not going to believe my own made up intention for her. I'm going to believe her actual intention,
Yep.
and then everything, and again, the anger or the frustration doesn't like automatically just go, but it starts to melt,
Yeah.
and then within a couple minutes, it's done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that idea, how to fight better.
Yeah, maybe that should be our thing. We talked about doing like an online course together. We'll do a course how to fight better with your
Yeah,
spouse.
yeah,
Think of how many relationships are affected when you don't take the time to stop and consider your partner, the person that you love, when you don't stop to consider the place that they're coming at. And I get it. Not everybody's in a space where you can take that moment. It might not dawn on you until later, but being able to take just a second and say, can we just have a timeout? I need to capture what I'm thinking and feeling so I can tell you without being angry. And I think, you know, Keith has been at this for 5 years. I've been at it for maybe 2. So I'm learning, but Keith is, I like to talk and talk and talk. And I'm like, oh, stop talking. I'm not the talker, but I feel like because he's been able to express himself better and take that pause or be able to read maybe how I'm feeling and take that step back, it's made me more inclined to share things that I wouldn't share. I didn't grow up in a very sharing household. It was everybody for themselves, but I feel like I'm starting to come around to, okay, I can maybe communicate, but let's not get crazy. I can have a conversation and talk, but the sharing my feelings part is not, yeah, it's not in my DNA. But Keith is, he's wrangling me there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another interesting thing is, how much we take away from our childhood, what we witnessed our parents doing. And, it takes a long time to unpack that and go, oh, wait a second, was this truth? Or is this just something I thought was true? Like, even like you're talking about the Christianity, right? I was told this thing over and over again, or I was indoctrinated with this idea that we don't share feelings. So it feels uncomfortable. But is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to live the second half of my life? And
Right.
challenge those ideas. I always just think, all the stuff we're talking about is such courageous work to look at yourself and to grow.
Yeah.
Such
Yeah.
courageous work. Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Chasing Thoughts podcast. Please support us by liking, subscribing, or leaving a review or comment. We would really appreciate it. If you'd like to be a guest, we would love to explore life and what it means to be human with you. Please email us at chasingthoughtspodcast@gmail.com.